The sound was sharp, wet, a crack of wood against bone that echoed between the narrow brick walls, louder than the rain. In the dim, buzzing glow of a dying street lamp, a boy's world shattered. Pain, white hot and absolute, exploded from his hand, shooting up his arm like lightning. He gasped, stumbling against the rough brick, the wall scraping his cheek as he fought to stay upright. "Please," he choked out, his voice raw with a panic that tasted like metal. "I didn't do anything." A shadow detached itself from the gloom, resolving into the shape of a man in a uniform. His head was shaved, slick with sweat, his eyes flat and empty. "Match the description," the cop growled, the words a meaningless justification for the violence. Another officer stepped forward, a lean silhouette, tapping his baton against a gloved palm, a silent promise of more to come. A third watched from the cruiser, a faint, knowing smirk playing on his lips. The boy's gym bag lay gutted on the pavement, its contents a pair of scuffed sneakers, a water bottle spilling into a greasy puddle. He had done everything right, everything his father had taught him. Keep your head down, be respectful, show them your hands, come home alive. He raised his one good hand, fingers spread wide. "You can check my bag. You can call my coach. I was just at practice." The first cop didn't answer. He just moved, shoving the boy hard against the wall. The impact stole his breath. From a nearby bar, a door opened, spilling light and laughter into the alley. A man saw the scene, his cigarette freezing halfway to his lips. Their eyes met for a split second. Then the man turned, stepped back inside and shut the door, plunging the alley back into darkness. Hope died with the click of the latch. A voice crackled from the sergeant's radio by the car. "Suspect is wearing a red jacket." The boy's hoodie was blue. For a single, breathless moment, he thought it was over. The lean cop snorted. "Doesn't matter," he hissed, his voice low and cruel. "He's got a mouth on him. Time he learned a lesson?" The baton crashed down again, this time across his ribs. A strangled cry escaped his lips as he crumpled to his knees, cradling his broken hand, tears and rain mixing on his face. The world narrowed to the pulsing agony in his arm and the sound of their boots fading away as they walked back to their car, their job done. This is a story from one city, but it echoes in so many others. What's the reality like where you live? Let us know your state in the comments below. If these stories matter, make sure your voice is heard. Like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing them to light. The rain had started an hour ago. A cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the Philadelphia streets and bled the color from the row houses. Inside, and the house was warm, smelling of the dinner Clara had kept on the stove. The sound of the front door opening was wrong. Not the usual cheerful clatter of a 16-year-old dumping his gym bag, but a hesitant, dragging scrape. Clara came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a smile on her face. The smile died when she saw him. Leo stood in the doorway, framed by the wet darkness behind him. He didn't step inside. He just stood there, trembling, his head bowed. One side of his face was an angry red scrape, raw and pebbled with asphalt. His blue hoodie was torn at the shoulder, but it was his right hand that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. He cradled it against his chest, and it was bent at an angle a hand was never meant to take. "Oh my God, Leo!" The words were a whisper. She rushed forward, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him. "Honey, what happened? Who did this to you?" He looked up, his eyes wide with a kind of shock that went deeper than the pain. "The cops," he whispered, and the name seemed to break him. His voice fractured. They just... Clara's face went bone white. She pulled him inside, out of the rain, shutting the door on the night. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the house. She was a nurse. She knew how to handle injuries, how to be calm in a crisis. But this was her son. Her hands fluttered uselessly. "The cops? What are you talking about? Why?" Footsteps sounded from the hallway. Not loud, not hurried, just the steady, even tread of a man who never rushed. Victor Carter appeared at the edge of the living room. He was a tall man, built with a mechanic's dense, functional strength. He moved with a quiet economy that made him seem smaller than he was, until you saw his eyes. They were calm, steady, and missed nothing. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The dish towel on the floor where Clara had dropped it, her panicked expression, his son's trembling frame. His eyes paused on Leo's bruised cheek, then settled on the broken hand. His expression didn't change, not a flicker, but the air in the room grew heavier, colder. He walked forward, his movements deliberate. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask who did it. Leo had already said the words. The cops. That was the answer to a different set of questions he hadn't asked yet. He knelt in front of his son, his eyes level with Leo's. He gently took Leo's uninjured arm. "Let me see," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried an authority that cut through Clara's panic. Leo flinched but let his father gently probe the edges of the swelling around his right wrist. Victor's touch was surprisingly delicate, his fingers mapping the damage with a practiced, dispassionate precision. Swelling is rapid, distal radius fracture, maybe. Metacarpal's almost certainly compromised. He's right-handed, his shooting hand. The thoughts were cold, clinical, an assessment of damage. The emotional response could come later. Damage assessment always came first. He looked up at his wife. "We're going to Temple University Hospital," he said, the words clear and final. He glanced back at Clara, whose face was a mask of disbelief and horror. "Call ahead. Tell them we have a suspected compound fracture of the right hand and wrist. Possible head trauma." The drive was 10 minutes of compressed silence. Clara sat in the back, her arm around Leo's shoulders, murmuring words Victor couldn't hear. He drove. His hands were relaxed on the wheel, his posture perfect. He checked his mirrors every 10 seconds. Not for traffic. It was a habit he had never broken. He registered every car, every pedestrian. A blue sedan 2 cars back had been there for 6 blocks. Probably nothing. Probably. He broke the silence. He didn't look at his son in the rearview mirror. He kept his eyes on the road. "Leo," he said. His voice was the same, calm, even. "The officers, did you get their names?" Leo's voice was small from the back seat. "One, the big one, his tag said Knox. The other, Moore. I think there was a sergeant, too, by the car." He just watched. Victor nodded slowly. Knox, Moore, an unnamed sergeant. The information was filed away, stored. "Okay," Victor said. Then he asked the next question. His voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm. "Leo, look at me. Did they say anything to you before it started? A reason?" Leo shook his head, the movement visible in the mirror. His voice cracked. "No. Nothing. They said I matched the description. That's it. That's all they said. Dad, I told them they had the wrong guy." Victor's grip on the steering wheel tightened by a single degree, imperceptible to anyone else. "A description of what? They didn't say," Leo answered, his voice trembling. "Just the description. The big one, Knox. He smiled when he said it. The smile. That was the detail that resonated in the quiet of the car. It wasn't about a mistake. It wasn't about enforcing the law. A smile meant something else entirely. It meant enjoyment. Victor took a slow breath. He could feel Clara's eyes on the back of his head. He could feel her fear, her anger, her silent plea for him to do something, to fix this. He paused, the car idling at a red light. The wipers scraped across the windshield. Scrape. Click. Scrape. Click. "I see," he said, the words low and flat. "And you didn't raise your voice? You kept your hands where they could see them?" "I did exactly what you always told me to do." Leo choked out. It didn't matter. The light turned green. Victor's foot pressed the accelerator. The car moved forward smoothly. The blue sedan was still 2 cars back. He looked at his son in the mirror again. He saw the pain, the confusion, the betrayal of a boy who had followed the rules and been broken for it. He met Leo's eyes in the reflection. "You did everything right, son," Victor said, and his voice was as steady as stone. The words were for his son, but the feeling behind them was for him. His knuckles had gone white on the steering wheel. It was the only outward sign of the change taking place inside him. The quiet mechanic was receding. The man who had spent 15 years keeping to himself, fixing engines, and building a peaceful life was being pushed aside. Something else was taking his place. Something colder, older. Something he had promised Clara he had buried overseas. They had made a mistake. They thought they were breaking the hands of a boy from a neighborhood that didn't fight back. They thought they were sending a message, and they were, but they had sent it to the wrong man. As the bright, sterile lights of the hospital emergency entrance came into view, Victor Carter made a decision. It wasn't born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was a simple, logical conclusion. A line had been crossed. An action had been taken. Now, there would be a reaction. He would find those men. He would learn their names, and he would bring the truth into the light. The decision settled inside him, hard and cold as the steel of the car door he pushed open. The chaos of the emergency room swallowed them, a blur of white coats, hushed questions, and the sharp, antiseptic smell of a place that dealt in damage. For the next few hours, Victor was a ghost, a silent presence in the background as doctors spoke in low tones, and x-rays confirmed the wreckage. He watched Clara's hope curdle into despair, and saw the light in his son's eyes dim with a diagnosis that was a theft of his future. But while they saw a tragedy, Victor saw a timeline, a series of events that had started in an alley and would end somewhere else entirely, on his terms. The final confirmation came from a surgeon with tired eyes and a gentle voice. He clipped the x-ray onto the light box. The image was stark. 2 clean fractures in Leo's dominant hand. The 3rd metacarpal was shattered. "He'll need surgery to set the bones with pins," the doctor explained. "We can schedule him for tomorrow morning. But I have to be honest with you. He won't be playing basketball for a while. Healing will take months. Physical therapy after that." "But he has the tournament," Clara said, her fingers pressed to her lips. "The scouts." "I'm sorry," the doctor said softly. Victor stared at the black and white image of his son's broken bones. Theft. They didn't just break a hand. They had stolen a scholarship. They had stolen a dream. He said nothing. As the doctor left, Clara's phone buzzed. She frowned at the caller ID, then answered, her voice still shaky. "Hello?" She listened, her expression shifting from confusion to pale-faced fear. I don't understand. No, he wasn't. He was coming home from practice." She fell silent again, listening to the voice on the other end. Finally, she whispered, "I see," and ended the call, her hand trembling. "What is it?" Victor asked, though he already knew. "That was the police department," she said, her voice hollow. "A Sergeant Lane. He said they're reviewing the incident. He said Leo matched the description of a robbery suspect and was aggressive, that he was resisting." Her voice broke. "They're twisting it. Victor, he said if we file a formal complaint, it could escalate things for our son." Victor closed his eyes for a single, long second. A threat, delivered by a bureaucrat. It was the second move on their timeline. His would have to be faster. He looked at his wife, at the terror in her eyes. He put a hand on her arm. "They will not get away with this," he said. The words were quiet, but they held the weight of a promise carved in stone. "I will see them fall." Later that night, long after they had gotten Leo settled at home, Victor stood alone in the garage. The scent of motor oil and cold steel was a comfort. It was a place of logic, of cause and effect. He moved to the heavy, gray tool chest in the corner. the one that hadn't been opened in years. He ran his fingers over the cold metal before lifting the lid. Beneath a tray of specialized wrenches lay a sealed, waterproof box. He peeled away the duct tape and lifted the lid. Inside was another life, a folder thick with commendations, mission debriefs, and photographs. He ignored the medals. He ignored a photo of a younger, leaner version of himself in desert camouflage. He pulled out a worn black notebook filled with contacts, codes, and old allies. Men who owed him favors. Men who understood how the world really worked. He flipped to a blank page. He wrote down 2 names, Knox, Moore. Then he pulled out a burner phone. He dialed a number he hadn't dialed in 5 years. It rang twice. Yeah, the voice was cautious. Noah, it's Vic. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then, it's been a long time. Vic, this isn't a social call, is it? They put my son in the hospital, Noah. Cops. A heavy sigh. Damn, I'm sorry to hear that, man. Truly. But you know what you're asking, right? You're not just asking for a name. You're asking me to kick a hornet's nest in a city that's already burning. It's my son's shooting hand, Victor said, his voice flat. The Hornets are already in my house. These guys, Knox and Moore, they're not just street bullies. They're protected, Noah said, his voice low. People who ask too many questions about them tend to get transferred or find a brick of coke in their car. You sure you want this smoke? I'm not asking you to fight, Noah. I'm asking for a map. They think they're untouchable because they believe everyone in my neighborhood is scared. I need them to learn that fear has limits. Another pause. Then, Noah's voice returned, resigned. They've got protection, high-ranking brass. That's all I know for sure. It's a start, Victor said. Thanks, Noah. He ended the call. Protection. That meant the rot went higher. He needed a different kind of map, one that showed the political landscape, not just the streets. He scrolled through the black notebook again, landing on a name he hadn't thought of in a decade. He dialed. The line clicked. A woman's voice answered, sharp and alert. Harlow, Zoe, it's Victor Carter. There was a moment of surprised silence. Victor, my God, it's been, 10 years? About that, Victor said. I need your help, and I need it to be off the books. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by professional caution. That's a big ask. Victor, my books are inspected. Thoroughly. 3 of your city's officers assaulted my 16-year-old son tonight, Victor said. No emotion. Just a statement of fact. Knox, Moore, and an unidentified sergeant. They broke his hand. I want everything you can find on them. Complaints, commendations, known associates, financial records, everything. Before sunrise, Zoe Harlow was quiet for a long time. Victor could hear the faint hum of a computer in the background. He could picture her, sitting at her desk late at night, a single lamp illuminating a mountain of paperwork. She was one of the few truly straight cops he had ever known. This call never happened, Victor, she said finally, her voice low and serious. And if this blows up, you are on your own. Send me the names. I'll see what I can find. He texted her the names, then disconnected the call, erasing the log. He stood in the silent garage, the burner phone feeling heavy in his hand. The first pieces were in motion. The sun would be up in 6 hours. Waiting was a skill, one Victor had perfected in deserts and mountains, in places where patience meant the difference between life and death. He didn't pace. He didn't watch the clock. He sat at his workbench, cleaning a carburetor with methodical, steady hands, his mind a quiet, cold machine. The burner phone vibrated once on the oil-stained wood just before 4 a.m. It was not a call. It was a single, encrypted data packet from a ghost number. Victor opened it. Files appeared. Service records. Complaints. All dismissed. Financials showing unexplained cash deposits. And a final piece of intel from Zoe, A note appended to Knox's file. Regular off-book meetings with an unidentified contact. High-value transaction suspected. Next meet is tonight. Corner of Girard and Frankfurt. Victor closed the files. The waiting was over. He stood, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and moved to the closet where he kept a plain, dark jacket. It was time to go hunting. He parked his nondescript sedan 3 blocks away from the intersection, in a spot where the shadows from an old church swallowed the car whole. He walked, not on the main street, but through the back alleys that ran parallel to it. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and decay. He moved with a practiced silence, his soft-soled work boots making no sound on the broken pavement. The warehouse was a skeletal relic of brick and rusted steel. Most of its windows were dark, shattered eyes, but a single harsh floodlight on a telephone pole cast a sterile white glare over a loading bay in the back. It created a perfect stage, brightly lit in the center, with a perimeter of deep, impenetrable shadows. An ideal place for a transaction or an ambush. Victor found his position behind a large, rusted dumpster. It offered solid cover and a clear line of sight to the loading bay. He checked his watch. The meeting was for 4:30 a.m. It was 4:28. He settled in. His breathing was slow and even, his pulse steady. He was no longer a mechanic. He was no longer just a father. He was an operator in his element. At 4:31, a black sedan with tinted windows rolled quietly into the lot and killed its lights. 2 men got out. Victor recognized Knox immediately. Broad-shouldered, arrogant, he moved like a man who had never been challenged. The second man was different. He was thinner, wore a tailored suit, and carried a slim leather briefcase. He moved with a sharp, predatory grace. Knox was a bully. This man was a shark. Victor's eyes narrowed. He watched their body language. Knox was agitated, gesturing impatiently. The stranger was calm, his hands still, his head tilted slightly as he listened. He was the one in charge, hiding behind the dumpster, the metallic tang of rust sharp in his nostrils. Victor focused on the conversation drifting across the damp air. The stranger handed Knox an envelope. It was thick with cash. "This is for your troubles," the stranger said, his voice low and smooth. "Hayes appreciates proactive policing." Knox grunted, spitting on the ground. The sound was ugly. "Proactive?" The kid mouthed off. "We just reminded him of the local customs. It's what we do. It keeps things orderly." "Order is good," the stranger replied, his tone unchanging. "But a decorated soldier's son is not orderly. Knox, it's a headline. Hayes doesn't like headlines. He doesn't write himself. You were supposed to be invisible. He's just a mechanic now," Knox sneered. "No one cares who he was. Around here, he's just another face, and his kid is just another punk who learned a lesson." Victor's hands curled into fists. Another face. The words echoed the cold dismissal in the smile Leo had described. This was the philosophy that broke his son's hand. The stranger was unfazed. "And the father? Is he going to be a problem?" Knox shifted his weight, trying to project confidence. "He's military, that father. I did some digging. Special forces. But he's been out a long time. Probably soft." The stranger's head snapped up slightly, a flicker of genuine interest or concern. "Special forces? You're certain?" "Yeah," Knox said, though his voice had lost some of its swagger. "But what's he going to do? File a complaint? We own the complaint department. Men like that don't file complaints." "Knox," the stranger said, his voice losing its smooth edge for the first time. "If he starts pushing, we'll need to make him the problem before he makes us one." So that was it. Escalation was already on the table. They knew who he was, and they were planning their next move. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night. The scrape of a boot on gravel. A third figure emerged from the far side of the lot. A man in a cheap security guard uniform, carrying a heavy flashlight. He was lanky and looked tired. An unplanned variable. "Hey!" the guard called out. his voice nervous but firm. "You can't be here. This is private property. I'm calling the cops." Knox turned, a look of utter contempt on his face. He took a step toward the guard. "Friend," he growled, his hand drifting toward the pistol on his hip. "Why don't you turn around and forget you saw anything?" The guard hesitated. His flashlight beam trembled. He was a civilian, in over his head, but he held his ground, his shoulders squared. "No, I'm calling it in." Victor's mind raced. The guard is an innocent. If he calls, real cops might show up, or Knox's friends. Unpredictable. If I do nothing, Knox will hurt him. To silence him. One option. Only one. He moved. He didn't run. He flowed out of the shadows, a dark shape detaching itself from the deeper darkness. "Hey," he called out, his voice steady and loud. It cut through the tension like a blade. "Leave him out of it." Knox spun around, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The stranger froze, his eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" Knox snarled. "Someone who's been listening," Victor said, taking another step into the light. The floodlight illuminated his face, hard, unforgiving. "And someone who knows what you did to my son?" Recognition dawned in the stranger's eyes. "Carter," he breathed. "It's him." Knox recovered fast, his training kicking in. His hand went for his gun. "You need to turn around and walk away, old man." "Or what?" Victor said, his tone dangerously calm. "You'll break my hand too?" The words hit their mark. Knox's face contorted in rage, and he drew his weapon. But Victor was already moving. He was not a mechanic anymore. He was a master sergeant, and the distance between them was a problem he had solved 1,000 times. He moved inside Knox's reach before the gun was even level, a sharp, brutal twist of his body. His left hand deflected the weapon's barrel skyward. His right hand clamped down on Knox's wrist. Bone grated. Knox cried out in pain. Victor used the officer's forward momentum, spinning him, slamming him face first against the hood of the black sedan. The gun clattered onto the wet pavement. The stranger didn't hesitate. He grabbed the briefcase and sprinted for the passenger side of the car. The security guard, finally finding his voice, yelled, "Freeze! I'm calling the cops!" "Don't!" Victor barked, his arm pressed hard against Knox's spine. Tires screeched as the sedan roared to life. The stranger now inside. The car fishtailed on the wet ground and disappeared into the night. Victor didn't have time. He couldn't hold Knox. He couldn't wait for the real police. He had what he needed. Confirmation. He shoved his free hand into Knox's jacket pocket, feeling for the envelope. His fingers closed around something else. A small, folded notebook. A ledger. He yanked it out. He shoved Knox hard against the car and stepped back into the shadows. He had the prize. He had sent a message. "This isn't over," Victor said, his voice like iron. He was a silhouette against the harsh light. "Tell Hayes I'm coming." He turned and melted back into the alleys, gone as quickly as he had appeared. Behind him, Knox scrambled for his radio, his voice frantic and panicked, shouting for backup. But Victor was already gone. He didn't run. He evaporated. He used the maze of alleys and darkened gangways he had memorized, moving from one pool of shadow to the next. He circled his own neighborhood twice, watching for the telltale headlights of a follow car, before slipping the sedan back into its spot. The sirens had faded. The night had grown quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence of a held breath. Inside, the house was still. He bypassed the kitchen, went straight to the one place where the rules were clear, where every problem had a mechanical solution. The garage. Under the harsh glare of a single bare bulb, he smoothed the sweat-dampened notebook onto his workbench. It was a cheap, spiral-bound ledger, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. The pages were filled with a crude, blocky script. It wasn't sophisticated, but it didn't need to be. It was a record of corruption. He scanned the columns, dates, initials, payout numbers. His eyes caught the letters immediately. K, M, W, Knox, Moore, Walsh. The three names Leo had given him. Next to their initials were numbers, usually in the low thousands. Then another initial appeared, H, Hayes, the name the stranger had mentioned. The numbers next to Hayes's initial were much larger. Addresses of warehouses and abandoned lots were scrawled in the margins. It was a map of their enterprise, a clear chain of command, from the street-level enforcers to the man pulling the strings. This was more than proof of an assault. This was proof of a conspiracy. Needing a better light, a clearer space to think, he took the ledger and walked into the house. The silence was heavy. Leo was upstairs, hopefully sleeping under the influence of the hospital's painkillers. Victor sat at the kitchen table, the ledger open in front of him, the grim reality of the numbers stark against the warm wood. He was so focused, tracing the lines of ink with his finger, that he didn't hear Clara approach. Her voice was a trembling whisper. "What is that, Victor? What is this?" He didn't look up from the page. The numbers held him captive, a story of greed and violence written in cheap blue ink. "It's leverage," he said. Her hand slammed down on the table, making him flinch. "It's a death wish. I saw your face when you brought Leo home. I haven't seen that look since before you came home for good. You promised me that man was gone." He finally looked up, and his eyes were dark, devoid of the warmth she knew. They were the eyes of the man in the desert camouflage photograph. "That man kept us alive then," he said, his voice low and even. "He's going to keep us alive now. They think we're just another family they can push around. They think they can break our son and send us a warning to stay quiet." Tears streamed down her face, silent and desperate. "And what if your way doesn't work? What if you push back and they decide a broken hand isn't enough of a warning? What happens to Leo then? To us?" She was pleading with him, trying to pull him back from the edge he was already stepping over. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. His touch was firm, grounding. "That's why it has to work," he said, and the simple finality in his voice ended the argument. "There is no other option." She pulled her hand away and left the room, the sound of a bedroom door closing upstairs, the only reply. The silence that returned was heavier than before. Victor was alone with the ledger and his decision. He knew she was right to be afraid. He was afraid too, not of them, but for his family. The thought hardened his resolve. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. His instincts were humming now, a low-frequency warning in the back of his mind. He stood and walked to the front window, peering through a gap in the blinds. The street was quiet, a row of familiar cars, and one that wasn't, a dark Ford sedan, parked 50 yards down, its engine off. Too new for the neighborhood. Two silhouettes inside. He watched it for 5 minutes. It didn't move. They were here. They were watching his house. The war had come home. He let the blind fall back into place. Staying here was no longer an option. A stationary target was a dead target. He needed to move. He needed more information. He needed to see them in their own territory. He grabbed his keys and slipped out the back door, taking the sedan. He didn't drive toward the city. He drove away from it, taking a long, circuitous route before doubling back, his eyes constantly checking his mirrors. He was clean. He found a parking spot 2 blocks from the 26th Police District building, a squat, ugly brick structure humming with an institutional indifference. He killed the engine and watched. For an hour, he saw the normal rhythm of a late-night shift, patrol cars coming and going, uniformed officers grabbing coffee from a nearby cart. Then he saw him. Knox emerged from the main entrance, his face still bruised from their encounter at the warehouse. He wasn't in uniform. He was talking to another man, a tall, wiry officer with pale, piercing eyes and a crooked smile. The man listened intently as Knox spoke, his head nodding. Knox handed him a small slip of paper. The tall officer took it, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. Then, almost casually, the tall officer looked up from his conversation. His gaze swept the street, a slow, methodical scan. It passed over parked cars, a bus stop, a darkened storefront, and then it stopped. For less than a second, his eyes seemed to lock directly onto the windshield of Victor's car. There was no sign of recognition on the man's face, no change in his expression. He just looked, then turned back to Knox and said something that made Knox laugh. But Victor felt it, a cold prickle on the back of his neck, the certainty of a predator that has been seen by another. His cover was gone. He didn't wait for confirmation. Being spotted was the same as being targeted. He started the sedan's engine and pulled into traffic, a calm, legal maneuver that betrayed none of the urgency screaming through his nerves. He drove for an hour, a complex, random pattern of turns and highway exits designed to expose a tail. He saw nothing, but that meant nothing. A professional tail would be invisible. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to Noah's. His current equipment was compromised. He needed an upgrade. He needed tools they wouldn't expect. There was only one place for that, a dusty, forgotten storage unit on the industrial outskirts of the city, a place that held the ghost of his former life. The roll-up metal door shrieked in protest as he heaved it open, the sound echoing down the long, concrete corridor lined with identical doors. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust, old canvas, and the faint, sharp tang of gun oil. He pulled a chain, and a single fluorescent bulb flickered to life, casting a cold, buzzing glow over the cluttered space. Under a heavy tarp sat a large, olive-drab footlocker. He undid the latches and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were the tools of his other life, not an arsenal. He was not an assassin. He was an operator. His tools were for intelligence and survival. An encrypted radio, a compact digital camera with a powerful long-range zoom lens, a set of lockpicks, and a perfectly maintained Glock 19, its matte black finish absorbing the light. He was checking the magazine on the Glock when his burner phone vibrated against the concrete floor. He answered. It was Noah. His voice was tight, urgent. Vic, you got company, a sedan from the precinct. They followed you. I was keeping an eye out like you asked. They're parked 2 blocks down. Lights off. Victor went still. He held the cold weight of the Glock in his hand. They were faster than he thought, more efficient. How many? He asked, his voice low. 2, far as I can tell. Vic, you need to get out of there. There's a chain link fence at the back of the complex. I can pick you up on the next street over. Victor looked around the 10 by 20 foot space. Stacks of old furniture and heavy crates formed narrow channels, one way in, one way out. It was a perfect kill box. He could run, and maybe they would catch him, or maybe they wouldn't. It was a gamble, or he could let them walk into the box, where he controlled the variables. No, Victor said. The decision was instant, logical. We let them come. What? Vic, that's suicide. You don't know who they're sending. I know exactly who they're sending, Victor replied. They'll send Knox. He's arrogant. He has a personal stake in this, and he'll bring the tall officer I saw him with, the one who spotted me. They think they're the hunters. We're going to let them think that right up until the trap springs. He gave Noah a quick, precise set of instructions, then ended the call. He moved with a sudden, furious efficiency. He dragged a heavy wooden wardrobe, positioning it to create a narrow 3-foot-wide channel leading from the door. He killed the overhead light, plunging the unit into near-total darkness, save for the weak yellow glow spilling in from the main corridor. He took his position behind a stack of heavy crates, the Glock in his hand, a heavy tire iron on the ground beside him. Then he waited. 5 minutes later, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. 2 sets. They were trying to be quiet, but they weren't good enough. You sure he's in here? A sharp voice asked. The tall officer. I'm sure, Knox's voice grunted in reply. Hayes wants him quiet. Tonight. We make it quiet. The lock on the door rattled. Then the metal door began to slide upward, slowly. A screech of metal on metal that was deafening in the silence. Light flooded the entrance. Two silhouettes stood there, framed against the corridor's yellow glow. Knox stepped inside first, his service pistol drawn, a mag light held alongside it. The tall officer followed, his own weapon up, his eyes scanning the cluttered space. "Carter!" Knox called out, his voice echoing off the concrete. "We know you're in here. Come on out. Make this easy." The only answer was the drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere down the hall. Knox took another step in, his beam cutting through the darkness. It swept past Victor's position, blinding him for a second. The fight was going to be desperate. The tall officer with Knox was younger, faster, moving with a practiced, by-the-book tactical sweep. But the book had rules. Victor didn't. As Knox passed the wardrobe, Victor moved. He didn't go for Knox. He went for the door. With a single, powerful shove, he sent the heavy metal door slamming down. It hit the concrete with a deafening boom, plunging the unit into absolute suffocating darkness. Panic. It was a weapon. For a split second, his opponents would be disoriented, blind. He wouldn't be. He had been sitting in the dark for 10 minutes. He knew the layout. He heard a curse from Knox, a frantic scramble. Before they could turn on their flashlights, Noah, moving in from his hiding spot near the door, swung the heavy tire iron. There was a sickening crunch of metal on bone and a sharp cry of pain. The tall officer's flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly, illuminating a chaotic scene of violence. One down. Victor lunged for Knox. He didn't use the gun. It was too loud, too final. He used his body, a 300-pound weapon honed by years of training. He slammed into Knox's side, driving him hard against a stack of crates. The breath exploded from Knox's lungs. The officer was strong, and he swung his pistol wildly like a club, catching Victor across the jaw. Pain flared, hot and white. But Victor drove a fist into Knox's ribs. Once. Twice. He heard a rib crack. Knox sagged. The fight was ugly, vicious. Knox was a street brawler, all brute force. Victor was an engine of precise violence. He twisted Knox's arm, forcing him to his knees. The gun fell from his numb fingers. "Enough!" Victor barked, his voice raw with fury. He yanked Knox's head back. His forearm pressed hard against the officer's throat. "You think you can come after my family? After my son?" Knox spat blood onto the concrete floor, his eyes blazing with defiant hatred. "You don't scare me. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a ghost. You don't even exist anymore." Victor leaned lower, his voice a low growl, right next to Knox's ear. He could feel the man's pulse hammering against his arm. "Ghosts can't be threatened, and they have all the time in the world to wait. You and Hayes, you're living on borrowed time. Every breath you take from now on is a gift from me. Remember that." He shoved Knox's face toward the floor. In the wild light of the fallen flashlight, Noah stood over the groaning form of the tall officer. The tire iron held ready. Sirens wailed in the distance. Getting closer, Victor pinned Knox with his knee. He knew what he had to say. He had to plant a seed of fear that would grow. "I know about the payouts," he whispered, his voice a sliver of ice. "I know about the warehouses. I have the ledger." He let the words sink in, watching as the defiance in Knox's eyes flickered, replaced by the first glint of genuine terror. "You come near my wife or my son again, and the next time we meet, I won't leave you breathing." He stood, pulling a dazed Noah toward the back of the unit. They didn't have much time. They slipped out through a pre-cut section of the chain-link fence as the first patrol car screeched to a halt at the front of the complex. They disappeared into the industrial wasteland, leaving two broken cops in a dark, silent storage unit. Noah drove, his hands tight on the wheel of his beat-up pickup, his knuckles white. He didn't ask questions. He just drove them to a small, anonymous apartment he kept over a laundromat in a part of the city where no one looked twice. Inside, and the air smelled of stale coffee and bleach. For the first time that night, Victor allowed himself to assess the damage. A deep bruise flowering on his jaw, a sharp pain in his cracked rib. The physical cost was irrelevant. The tactical cost was what mattered. He was exposed, reactive. They would be hunting him now with everything they had. That had to change. He needed to get ahead of them. He opened the footlocker he'd had Noah retrieve from the storage unit. He bypassed the Glock. He didn't need a weapon. He needed eyes. He lifted out the compact digital camera, its long-range zoom lens feeling solid and purposeful in his hand. The ledger had given him a list of potential meeting spots. One stood out, a rundown bar in South Philly called the Rusty Mug. According to the ledger, it was a frequent payout location. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead he had. He spent the next day planning, using a stashed SUV Noah had procured for him, a vehicle with a bit more power than his family sedan. He found his perch in the derelict shell of a tenement building across the street from the bar. 2 floors up, the room smelled of dust and pigeons. It gave him a perfect, unobstructed view. He set up the camera on a small, steady tripod, attaching it to his burner phone. He focused the lens. The grimy sign of the Rusty Mug jumped into sharp relief. He could count the cracks in the paint. He settled in to wait. Patience was a weapon, and he was an expert in its use. For hours, nothing. Just the usual flow of barflies and neighborhood regulars. Then, just after 10 p.m., a black SUV pulled up, the kind favored by law enforcement. 3 men got out. Knox was the first. His face was a thundercloud, a fresh set of stitches above his eye. The tall, wiry officer from the precinct was next. The third man was older, with a gut hanging over his belt and the weary, cynical eyes of a man who had been breaking rules for a long time. Victor's finger was steady on the shutter button. Click, click, click. He zoomed in, capturing their faces, their tense conversation, the way the older cop's eyes constantly scanned the street. They huddled together under the buzzing neon sign, shoulders hunched, a circle of conspirators. This was it. This was the proof he needed. His burner phone vibrated in his pocket. He answered without taking his eye from the viewfinder. It was Noah. His voice was a panicked hiss. "Marcus, you still tailing them?" "Yes," Victor said, his voice low. "Get out now. It's a trap." Victor's blood ran cold. He pulled back from the camera, his senses screaming. "What are you talking about?" "They know," Noah hissed. "They're not meeting Hayes. That bar, it's bait. I just intercepted chatter on the precinct channel. Knox told them you'd show. They're closing the net." Victor cursed, a raw, silent motion of his lips. Through the lens, he saw the older cop step away from the others, light a cigarette, and look directly up at his building. Not at his window, but at the building itself. A hawk looking for its prey. Then he saw it in his peripheral vision. Headlights, flaring to life in his rearview mirror from where he'd parked the SUV. 2 unmarked sedans, appearing from nowhere, boxing him in from behind, tires screeching on the wet asphalt as they blocked the alley. The trap had sprung. He didn't think. He reacted. He shoved the camera into his bag, abandoned the tripod, and bolted from the room. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his footsteps echoing in the abandoned building. He hit the ground floor and burst out the back, into a narrow, trash-filled alley. The sedans were at the front. Maybe he had a chance, but another car, a heavy black cruiser, skidded to a halt, blocking the alley's exit. Doors flew open. Men in plain clothes, guns drawn, began to advance. Victor was boxed in. He slammed the brakes on his own momentum, scanning for an escape. His eyes locked onto a rusted metal staircase leading to a fire escape on the side of the building he just left. It was his only way out. He grabbed the camera bag and launched himself at the stairs, pulling himself up the slick, rain-dampened steps 2 at a time. The men below shouted, their voices sharp commands in the night. He ignored them. He kept climbing. The door at the top of the stairs was locked. He didn't slow down. He braced himself, aimed a powerful kick just beside the knob. The wood splintered. The door flew open. He stumbled inside, landing in a crouch. He crawled to a grimy window, peering down. He could hear their voices echoing up the alley. Where the hell did he go? He can't be far. Check the buildings. He moved through the darkness of the abandoned apartment, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His phone vibrated. Not a call, a text from an unknown number. The screen lit up his face in the gloom. You're in over your head, Carter. Walk away or your son pays. The words hit him like a physical blow. His pulse spiked. It wasn't just a threat. It was a statement. We know where to find him. We can get to him whenever we want. Something inside him, a carefully constructed wall of cold, professional detachment, shattered. This was no longer about justice. It was about survival, annihilation. He deleted the message and moved, a new, colder fire burning in his veins. He found a back door that led to another alley, this one quiet and empty. He climbed down into an old delivery van he had stashed there days ago, a contingency plan for a situation just like this. The engine turned over on the first try. He pulled away from the curb, joining the flow of late-night traffic, just another anonymous van in a city full of them. As he drove, his phone buzzed again. He answered, his voice a low growl. Talk to me. It was Noah. Man, are you clear? They're swarming that whole block. Aha, they're spooked now, Victor said, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the mirrors. Good. Let them know I'm not backing down. Man, they're not just crooked. They're desperate, Noah warned, his voice strained. You're pushing them into a corner. You know what happens then. Victor's jaw was a block of granite. I know, he said. He ended the call, driving in silence, the weight of the text message pressing down on him. They thought they could scare him. They thought they could use his son as a shield. He called Noah back. They put a tail on you that fast? Noah said, answering immediately. They're organized. Vic, this is bigger than a few bad apples. Victor's breathing was heavy, ragged. They're desperate, he repeated, the words tasting like ash. And they made a mistake. They showed me their hand. They think threatening my son will make me back down. There was a pause on the line. Then Noah asked the question that hung in the air between them. And will you? Victor tightened his grip on the wheel, the city lights blurring past his window. He thought of Leo's broken hand, of the smile on Knox's face, of the cold, calculated threat on his phone. A cold fury settled over him, clear and sharp as glass. No, he said, his voice quiet, but lethal. They just told me exactly where to aim. The rage was a fire, but it burned cold. It sharpened his thoughts into a single, lethal point. They had tried to trap him. They had failed. They had tried to threaten him. That had failed too, but it had given him their next move. A physical attack was clumsy. A legal one was cleaner. If they couldn't make him disappear, they would make him a monster, a frame-up. It was the classic play of a corrupt system. They would plant something, drugs, a weapon, something that could be tied to him, and they would do it where no one would ever question it. Not in a back alley, but in the one place where evidence was sacred and unassailable. He picked up the phone. Noah, he said, his voice flat. Get your van. We're going to the courthouse. Noah's van was parked in the shadow of a monolithic bank building, offering a clear diagonal view of the side and rear entrances of the Juanita Kidd Stout Center for Criminal Justice. The building was a fortress of concrete and darkened glass, designed to project an image of immutable authority. Victor sat in the passenger seat, a pair of binoculars to his eyes. He wasn't watching the grand public entrance. He was watching the small, anonymous doors used by staff, maintenance, and those who preferred not to be seen. He had been watching for 3 hours. Anything? Noah whispered from the driver's seat. Nothing, Victor said. They'll wait until the late shift change. Fewer witnesses. He knew it was a gamble, a logical leap based on the psychology of his enemy. Hayes was a man who understood the theater of power. Framing a decorated war hero required the perfect stage, and there was no better stage than the very heart of the justice system he controlled. Just after midnight, a dark, unmarked city vehicle pulled up to a restricted side entrance. The driver got out. It was Knox. He walked to the back, opened the trunk, and hefted a heavy black duffel bag. Victor raised the binoculars. Knox looked tense, his eyes darting around the empty street. He was a bully outside his comfort zone. "That's him," Victor said. He watched as Knox swiped a key card. A green light blinked. The heavy steel door clicked open. "Stay here," Victor ordered. "Keep the engine running. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, leave. Get the evidence we have to the journalist. Her name is Maya." "Vic, this is insane. Let me go with you." "I need you here. I'm the bait. You're the escape." Before Noah could argue, Victor was out of the van. He moved across the street, a fleeting shadow in the pools of darkness between streetlights. The steel door was heavy, closing slowly on a pneumatic hinge. He reached it just as it was about to latch, his fingers catching the edge, and slipped inside. The corridor was long, sterile, and silent. The air smelled of floor wax and old paper. He could hear the faint echo of footsteps ahead. He followed, his work boots making no sound on the polished linoleum. The footsteps led him to the basement level, to a hallway lined with doors marked Evidence Storage. One of the doors was ajar. Light and hushed voices spilled out. Victor flattened himself against the cool concrete wall and listened. "Are you sure about this, Knox?" a nervous voice asked. "Planting evidence from a military case file? If this gets audited..." Victor peered around the doorframe. Knox and the same tall, wiry officer from the precinct were crouched over a large cardboard evidence crate. Knox was pulling a sealed plastic bag from his duffel. Inside the bag, Victor could see the unmistakable shape of high-caliber rifle rounds, the kind issued to his unit overseas. His stomach twisted. They weren't just planting a gun. They were planting his past. Knox slammed the crate lid shut with a puff of dust. "It won't get audited," he snarled. "Hayes has the DA on a leash. By the time anyone looks, Carter will be a federal fugitive. He won't be a decorated hero anymore. He'll be a disgruntled vet running an arms ring. It's a better story. And in this city, the best story always wins." "And the journalist he's been talking to?" the other officer asked, his voice still shaky. Knox sealed the crate with a length of red evidence tape. His voice was cold. "Journalists can't print what they can't prove, and a dead man can't testify." A sudden vibration in Victor's pocket. A text from Noah, patrol car circling the block. The buzz was almost silent, but in the dead air of the basement, it sounded like a hornet. Knox's head snapped up, his eyes, trained to react to the slightest anomaly, narrowed. "Who's there?" he shouted. There was no point in stealth now. Victor bolted. He sprinted back down the corridor, his boots pounding against the floor, the sound exploding in the enclosed space. Shouts erupted behind him. "Stop! Police!" He hit the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time, his shoulder grazing the rough concrete wall. He could hear them closing behind him, their heavier footsteps echoing his own. He burst through the door to the ground floor, into a vast, empty atrium. The dome of the courthouse soared above him, a monument to a justice that didn't exist. He ran for the main exit, but 2 uniformed night guards, alerted by the shouts, were moving to block his path. He changed direction, skidding on the polished marble, and dove into another corridor. A bullet cracked past his ear, shattering a glass display case filled with historical gavels. They were using lethal force. Here, the desperation was palpable. He found another stairwell and started to climb, the only direction left. Up. He kicked open the door at the top and stumbled out onto the rooftop. The cold night air hit him like a slap. Rain began to fall, a light drizzle. The city sprawled below, a glittering carpet of lights. He was trapped. He ran to the edge, looking down. A sheer 5-story drop. No escape that way. He could hear them on the stairs, their shouts getting closer. He had maybe a minute. He pulled out his phone. He had been recording audio since he entered the courthouse. He had the photos from the bar. He had everything. He opened the secure app Zoe had given him, found Maya's contact, and hit send. The progress bar appeared, 10%, 20%. The sound of the stairwell door being thrown open echoed across the roof. A single plainclothes officer burst through, gun drawn. It was one of the men from the alley trap. "Freeze! Carter! Hands up!" Victor ignored him. His eyes were glued to the phone. 50%. 60%. The officer advanced, his weapon steady. "I said, hands up!" 75%. 80%. The officer was 10 feet away. He was taking aim. 95%. 100%. Upload complete. Victor dropped the phone and lunged. He didn't run at the man. He ran toward the rooftop's edge, forcing the officer to turn. As the man pivoted, Victor slammed his shoulder into his chest. They went down together, rolling across the wet gravel of the roof. The officer's gun skittered away, clattering near the edge. The officer was younger, stronger, swinging wildly. He caught Victor across the jaw, the blow snapping his head back. But Victor recovered, twisting, pinning the man's arm against the roof. He drove his weight down. There was a sharp crack. The officer yelped in pain. Victor didn't have time for a fight. He delivered a single, precise blow to the side of the man's head. The officer went limp. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the fallen gun. More shouts from the stairwell. He ran to the far side of the building as two more officers spilled onto the roof. Below, in the alley, he saw the welcome sight of Noah's van screeching to a halt. He had one chance. He took a running leap, clearing the gap to the lower roof of the adjacent building, landing hard, the impact jarring his entire body. He rolled, came to his feet, and scrambled down a fire escape ladder, dropping the last 10 feet to the pavement. The side door of the van flew open. He dove inside, landing on a pile of dirty blankets. "Go!" he yelled. Noah floored it. The van shot out of the alley just as police sirens, loud and urgent, began to converge on the courthouse from all directions. The storm broke just before dawn, not with rain, but with kilobytes and pixels. Maya's article, published on the website of a national news organization, landed like a precision-guided missile. It contained everything: photos of the backroom meetings, the full, unedited audio of Knox planning the frame-up in the courthouse basement, and a meticulously researched history of complaints against Hayes' unit. By sunrise, the city was on fire. The DCOMWER's office, implicated in the audio, had no choice but to launch an immediate investigation. An emergency hearing was called. Victor was no longer a ghost hiding in the shadows. He was the man at the center of the storm. He spent the morning with Leo, not explaining the details, but reinforcing the reason. Then, dressed in a simple, clean suit that couldn't quite hide the hardened lines of his body, he prepared to walk back into the same building he had just escaped. The front steps of the Juanita Kidd Stout Center for Criminal Justice were a chaotic sea of cameras, microphones, and shouting reporters. A wall of noise and flashing lights. Victor stepped out of Noah's van, and the chaos surged toward him. He put a steadying hand on Leo's shoulder. Noah flanked his other side. They moved as a single, determined unit. "Mr. Carter, is it true you're a former Special Forces operator?" "Leo, can you tell us what happened in that alley?" "Is the mayor's office involved?" Victor ignored the questions. His eyes were fixed on the courthouse doors. This was a new kind of battlefield. No cover, no concealment. The objective was not to survive, but to endure. He kept his face a blank mask, his expression unreadable. He could feel Leo beside him, his son's fear warring with a newfound resolve. The boy stood taller, his jaw set, his bandaged hand a stark white symbol against his dark jacket. They pushed through the media scrum, a silent, unbreachable rock against which the waves of questions broke and fell away. Inside the hearing room, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. It was packed. Lawyers in expensive suits whispered to each other. Uniformed officers lined the walls, their faces grim, refusing to make eye contact. At a long table at the front sat Elias Hayes. He was flanked by two sharp-looking attorneys, his suit immaculate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like a man in complete control, but Victor saw the details. The slight tremor in the hand that held his pen, the muscle that jumped in his jaw. The man was a cornered animal wearing a bespoke suit. Victor chose a seat in the second row, directly behind Hayes. A deliberate choice, a tactical placement. He wanted Hayes to feel his presence, to know he was there. As they sat, Hayes turned slightly, a confident, predatory smirk fixed on his face. He leaned back, close enough for his whisper to be a venomous hiss, meant only for Victor. You should have stayed a mechanic. Carter, you had a quiet life, a good son. Now look what you've done. You brought the war right to his front door. Victor didn't whisper back. He let his voice carry, clear and steady, cutting through the low murmur of the room. Several reporters in the front row turned their heads. The war was already there. Hayes, you and your men brought it. You just thought we wouldn't fight back. You're not used to that. Hayes' smirk tightened. He was no longer just speaking to Victor. He was performing for the room, projecting an aura of untouchable power. This city understands order. It understands who's in charge. And it's not you. You're right, Victor said, his eyes locking onto Hayes'. It's not me. It's the truth. And it's coming for you. A gavel struck the wood block with a sharp crack, silencing the room. A stern-faced judge took his seat. The proceedings began. A senior prosecutor from the district attorney's office stood up, his face grim. He spoke of the disturbing evidence that has recently come to light and the serious allegations of corruption and abuse of power. Victor wasn't listening to the prosecutor. He was watching Hayes. He saw the way Hayes' lawyer leaned in, whispering reassurances. He saw the way Hayes nodded, projecting an image of a man unconcerned, a man merely enduring a tiresome but necessary bureaucratic process. But Victor saw the facade. The confidence was a performance. The calm was a lie. The man was holding himself together by a thread, and then the thread snapped. A commotion erupted at the back of the room. A side door was thrown open, and two large men in suits, internal affairs investigators, were half dragging, half escorting a third man into the room. His wrists were in handcuffs. His face was twisted in a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. It was Knox. The room's attention shifted instantly. Reporters stood up, craning their necks. The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. Hayes froze, his head snapping around. For the first time, the confident smirk on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock, then raw panic. Knox was not a willing witness. He was a sacrifice, and he knew it. He saw Hayes sitting at the front of the room, pristine and protected by his lawyers, while he was the one in cuffs, the one being led to the slaughter. The betrayal was a living thing in his eyes. He fought against the grip of the investigators, his body straining, his voice a raw, desperate shout that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "This is bull! You promised! Hayes! You promised you'd take care of me!" Hayes' face drained of all color. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Get him out of here," he barked at his lawyer, but his voice cracked, thin and reedy. It was too late. Knox was unhinged, a cornered animal lashing out at his master. He lunged forward, dragging the investigators with him, his arm outstretched, a single finger pointing directly at the man at the front table. "Tell them the truth," he screamed, his voice breaking with rage and desperation. "You gave the orders. You set him up. You told me to make him quiet. All of it." The room exploded. Reporters scrambled over each other, their cameras flashing like a strobe light, capturing the complete and utter implosion of Elias Hayes' world. The judge hammered his gavel, his shouts for order lost in the rising tide of chaos. Hayes' attorneys were on their feet, shouting objections, but they were drowned out. Through it all, Victor Carter sat perfectly still. He watched as the carefully constructed composure of his enemy shattered into a million pieces. Hayes' eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. His face, moments before a mask of arrogant control, had crumbled, revealing the panicked, terrified man beneath. His own man had turned against him. His own system was devouring him whole. The chaos of that hearing room bled into the city's political life for weeks. Knox, facing a mountain of charges, cut a deal. His testimony was a key that unlocked a dozen doors internal affairs had never been able to breach. The trial that followed was a formality, a grim piece of theater. The ledger, the audio recordings, and the damning testimony of a broken street cop painted a picture so corrupt it left the city reeling. Elias Hayes, the man who had once held the city's order in his fist, was reduced to a defendant in a cheap suit, his power stripped away one headline at a time. Now, weeks later, the final act was set to play out in a different courtroom, one quieter, colder, and stripped of all chaos. This was the room for consequences. Victor sat in the third row with Clara and Leo. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. Elias Hayes stood at the defense table, a ghost of the man he had been. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogant smirk had been replaced by a tight, bitter line. He looked defeated, but not broken. Not yet. The judge, a woman with a face carved from granite, looked down at him. "Mr. Hayes, do you have anything to say before this court passes sentence?" Hayes cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edges of the lectern. He surveyed the room, his eyes lingering for a moment on Victor. "I've served this city for 25 years, he began, his voice raspy but defiant. "I've put my life on the line. I've made mistakes, but I did what I thought was necessary to maintain order in a city that is constantly on the verge of chaos. This isn't justice. This is politics. You don't know how deep the system goes. This is bigger than me." He was trying to cast himself as a soldier, a necessary evil, but the words fell flat in the quiet room. They sounded like what they were, the excuses of a tyrant. The judge's face remained impassive. She waited until he was finished. "Perhaps, Mr. Hayes, but you are the one standing here today." She looked down at the papers in front of her. The verdict had already been decided by a jury weeks ago. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy, extortion, aggravated assault. For these crimes, this court sentences you to a term of no less than 25 years in federal prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 25 years. It was a life sentence. As the judge spoke, a side door opened. A man in a dark federal agent suit stepped in and quietly handed a folder to the lead prosecutor. The prosecutor opened it, his eyes scanning the top page. From his vantage point, Victor saw the flash of a new warrant on the man's tablet. He saw 2 names of police captains he didn't know, and he saw the name of a city council member. The machine was unraveling faster than anyone expected. The disease was spreading. 2 federal marshals moved to flank Hayes, ready to lead him away. As they put their hands on his arms, Hayes snapped his head back, his eyes finding Victor in the crowd. His face was a mask of pure hatred. "You think this is over, Sir Carter?" he snarled, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "You think you've won? There are others, and they will come for you." Victor didn't move. He met the man's gaze without blinking. The marshals began to pull Hayes toward a side door. As he passed Victor's row, he stopped for a split second. Their eyes locked. There was no sound, but Victor saw the words form on Hayes's lips. A silent, personal promise. "I'll find your boy." Victor gave a slow, deliberate nod. Acknowledged. Accepted. The challenge was made. He stood slowly, his voice calm, but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs in the courtroom. "Let them," he said, his words directed only at the retreating figure of Hayes. "But remember this, every step they take in the dark, I'll be there waiting." The door slammed shut behind Hayes, his shouts fading into the corridor. The courtroom began to empty, the tense silence replaced by a buzz of conversation. Leo let out a long, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. He looked at his father, his eyes wide. "It's over," he whispered. Victor looked down at his son. He saw the relief, but also the new, hard-earned wisdom in his eyes. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, his grip firm and steady. "A battle is over. Leo," he said, his voice low and serious. "Not the war. Men like Hayes, they're a symptom, not the disease. But today, we showed them that the disease can be fought." Victor squeezed his son's shoulder, a gesture of quiet pride and shared understanding. Together, they turned away from the empty defense table in the judge's bench. They walked with Clara and Noah down the long center aisle, their footsteps echoing in the now cavernous room. The heavy wooden doors at the back represented a boundary, a line between the cold, formal end of their legal battle and whatever came next. As a court officer pulled one of the doors open, the sound hit them first, a low, indistinct roar that grew louder with every inch the door opened, pouring into the silence of the courtroom. When they stepped outside, the roar became a wall of human voices. The gauntlet of reporters was still there, but they had been pushed back by a larger crowd. Hundreds of people filled the courthouse steps and the plaza below. They were people from his neighborhood, activists he'd seen on the news, parents holding their children's hands, ordinary citizens holding makeshift signs. And they were chanting, not his name, his son's. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" Leo froze, overwhelmed by the faces, the noise, the tidal wave of raw, unfiltered emotion. For a moment, he was a 16-year-old boy again, lost and terrified. Victor leaned close, his voice a quiet anchor in the storm. "Speak your truth, son. It's all they want to hear." Encouraged, Leo took a deep breath. He nodded, and a new strength settled in his shoulders. He walked forward to the forest of microphones that had been set up on the steps. Victor watched him, a silent guardian at his back. He saw his son look past the news cameras, his eyes searching for and finding the faces in the crowd. The other kids his age, the worried-looking parents. He wasn't speaking to the media. He was speaking to them. His voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger with every word. "My father taught me something these last few weeks," he began. "He taught me you don't let fear decide who you are." He paused, letting the crowd grow quiet. "They told my parents I was resisting. They wanted to make my voice small. They wanted to make me invisible, just another statistic in a file they could close. They count on our silence. They think fear is stronger than our love for each other. They think their badges make them right." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But today, my father and I, we decided not to be silent." Leo continued, his voice rising with passion. "And I'm asking you not to be silent either. When you see something wrong, film it. When you hear a lie, correct it. When they try to make your neighbor invisible, stand with them and make them seen. They can't silence all of us." The crowd erupted in cheers, a sound of defiance and hope that echoed off the cold stone of the courthouse. Leo blinked back tears, taking a step back from the microphones. His speech finished. Victor moved to stand beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stood there, a silent, solid presence next to his son. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the community that had risen up and understood. The fight was far from over. Hayes had other friends. The system was vast, but the balance had shifted. In the glare of the afternoon sun, under the watchful eyes of the city, a father and son stood side by side. They were no longer a victim and an avenger. They were catalysts, and a new, brighter fire had just been lit.